Hello, welcome to Sacred Assumptions. My name is Alaric, and I have a bachelor's degree in geology.
I'm Ben, and I have a bachelor's degree in apologetics.
So, for this session, we're going to be going over 1 Peter 4, 1 through 11. And then we'll have other conversations later on in the next part of the session, the episode. Alaric here. This session became one episode due to us talking about the topic in the middle of the session. I want to apologize as well for the audio being a bit bad. Thank you. So, with that, we will get started here with 1 Peter 4, 1 through 12. I will read the verses for us, and then we will have our discussion and talk. All right. 1 Peter 4. Since therefore Christ suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves with the same way of thinking. For whoever has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, so as to live for the rest of the time in the flesh, no longer for human passions, but for the will of God. For the time that is past suffices for doing what the Gentiles wanted to do, living in sensuality, passions, drunkenness, orgies, drinking parties, and lawless idolatry. With respect to this, they are surprised when you do not join them in the same flood of debauchery, and they malign you. But they will give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. For this is why the gospel was preached, even to those who are dead, that though judge in the flesh the way people are, they might live in the spirit the way God does. The end of all things is at hand. Therefore, be self-controlled and sober mind, for the sake of your prayers. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sin. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling. As each has received a gift, use it to serve others, as good stewards of God's varied grace. Whoever speaks as one who speaks oracles of God, whoever serves as one who serves by the strength that God supplies, in order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. To him belong glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. So is there any parts that stand out to you?
I guess it's interesting how, wherever it says, since therefore Christ suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves with the same way of thinking. The arm yourself aspect is an interesting terminology for that.
That is true. Because for it, I would think of it's kind of like a military term that, like the bear arms, or in the sense of grabbing your guns or holstering your sword at that time.
Yeah, I mean, it basically sounds like it's like a protective, something to protect you, armor.
Mm-hmm. And for them to give it in a way that probably doesn't seem, by most people's standards of how to think of, like, it's that since Christ suffered in the flesh, to arm yourself in the same way of thinking. It's not, you'd be like, hey, like, he was able to defend himself, like, with either a big sword or big gun, and it is more of Christ's suffering of, like, see how he suffered.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's how you are to defend yourself.
So it says, whoever has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin. That's the point. That's the purpose of the arm yourselves in the same way that he did.
Yeah, because it's not the original. It's not the same way of a physical battle in the sense that people will be like, oh, I got to fight another country. This is fighting an internal aspect, a spiritual aspect of your life. And that requires a different way, and that is your flesh.
Part of what that may just because of some stuff I've read kind of recently, but part of what this makes me think of is I can see it being essentially like how there are certain monks that have been around during church history who have what do you call it? They have leaned more into this whole thing of suffering. And their idea was that if you don't enjoy any of the stuff of life, you have more piety, or you have you will have a better chance of experiencing, I guess, spiritually Christ, because you are not allowing your body to enjoy the world. But that involves essentially like almost like making sure you are uncomfortable in life.
Yeah,
And I'm not saying that's good. I'm saying that's what I'm wondering if this is the type of thing that got them to think of that, because it says whoever has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin. And that's usually the idea for them, is that they would make sure that they didn't have any sort of comfort, even the typical comforts that you would think of, like a decent bed to sleep and stuff like that. Just making sure that they are suffering in all these different ways. And the whole point of that was so it could push them more into not enjoying sin. It's twisted.
It's a way
of thinking about
it. It is a way to think about it, but I'm also like there's also the other arguments of like I think of like a door or something like God's gifts and blessings and joy.
Yeah.
God's blessings. And so it's one of those things of like, okay, what is a blessing? What is the flesh? But for this, I think the monks that went into it, there is a concept of it that's good, but there's also a way of taking it too far, of like doing all that stuff at your entire life to be that way. I can see with the part where Jesus says, like, if your eye causes you to sin, take it out. If your hand causes you to sin, like, cut it off. And I can see where that sort of mentality of just like going to those sects, SECT, would actually be, for a little bit, would be actually useful if you're suffering in those ways, that you are removing yourself from it. The whole part of life apart from everybody else, but those people who are living exactly that way, I don't think is
right. I mean, basically, it's that for monks, what they're doing is they're trying to make sure they weren't enjoying the aesthetics of life. And there's actually a passage from Paul that actually speaks against that, so that you shouldn't be trying to not enjoy. You shouldn't be trying to be. I forget if aesthetic means that aesthetic means you are enjoying stuff, or you make sure you don't enjoy it. Basically, Paul's talking about how you shouldn't be trying to keep yourself from enjoying the world, in a sense, the world that God created.
Yeah. Which
is essentially what they tend to do. Of course, I think that he was probably describing some other groups of people, because monks weren't around then, at least not for the church. So,
yeah, I think the monks weren't definitely around there, but I can see different religious organizations definitely and Gentile culture of you're practically going at like one of two extremes possibly. Because you had those parts which we like see later on, drinking parties, orgies, drunkens, passions, all that. But I'm pretty sure we would probably call it, there were probably some temples that were like, you see the Buddhist monks, the Tibetan monks over there that are seclude themselves or have this ideology of abstaining, and from it that ideology came through. And I also wonder if some of the ideas was also Jewish teachings of trying to put the law into Christianity, and just them going, well, I've got to do all these things. I'm just going to go very far into it to make sure I don't do any of this. And that you get into the same boat of what Jews were doing at that time. It's making it impossible for them. And probably the part that people will probably ask is like, has ceased from sin? Because that's a question that probably people will be like, am I at some point going to be like holy that I don't sin anymore if I go this way? Because I can see some people being tempted also to go to those groups. It's like, well, I'm not going to be sinning anymore if I do all this stuff.
Well, I guess that part of it is because it says whoever has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin. That suffered in the flesh is probably meaning that the difference between that and you are indulging the flesh. So you're not. So it's it's similar to what Paul has talked about. How Paul is talking about, where he says he makes sure that he, I think, basically beats his body, or basically takes control of his body. Doesn't allow himself to give into temptation. That he's more. I forget exactly how he terms it, because I don't think it's that he beats his body, but that he basically makes sure that he is taking control of his flesh, and it's not rather than it controlling him.
You have to double check it, because the part I think of is the part where in Romans where he says, "I do the things I don't want to do."
Yeah, but it's not. It's actually him more referring to that specific thing of him saying that it specifically has to do with his body, that he makes sure to take control of his body, not let his body be not let his body be the one to have master over him, but him master his body.
Yeah, because most of the time, people talk about when his suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, is more of that there those who are not, who are, as you say, in control or not giving in and to sins of the flesh. They are not sinning in the ways of the flesh because they've put their mind on a different goal. They're trying to imitate Christ. That if they're focused on that and that sort of suffering, that they're not going to sin in those ways. While the moment you stop putting yourself in those moments of suffering like Christ is when you will like go back into sinning right there. So it's more of like, once you get yourself into that mindset uh, you're not going to be doing the act, going to be sinning. But the moment you stop, that is when you start to allow sin to come back in the ways of the flesh.
So are any of these the references to that passage might be the thing I was referring to with Paul? Doesn't look like it.
No worries, I'll just edit that whole entire thing out. Just,
You were talking still.
I know.
I mean, if you want to let that out.
No. I mean, edit the part out that you mentioned about Paul saying that. But no, I'm not going to do that. But just having fun. But yeah, because as it goes on, it goes, says to live for the rest of the time in the flesh, no longer for human passions, but for the will of God. And I think the part there of the will of God and not human passions is that part right there where you're setting your mind on Christ's suffering, that you're in that moment, you're not thinking about your flesh. You're thinking about doing what the will of God is. In that moment, you're not sinning. But the moment you get off is the moment you start sinning. You can go back to sinning.
Yeah, I guess the thing I find interesting with that is because it says human passions, and generally, like, I think part of what my thinking with that is that, you know, it's making out like human passions are bad, which I think generally that's how people are looking at it. But I'm also thinking of that when you human passions are also, I guess part of how I would look at it is that there are passions God has given us, like fleshly passions, you know, are stuff that is enjoyable to the body that God has actually designed us for. And so, and that's part of what I think of whenever I see this. So whenever it says no longer for human passions, but for the will of God, I'm like, well, I mean, there's stuff that He's given us passion for, like that our bodies can enjoy, that would still be the will of God.
Yeah.
But this might be like a different mentality of what's referring to by human passions, because I'm guessing that the human passions aspect is Him also referring to this whole list of things.
Yeah.
Of this. So whenever He's saying human, He may be referring to the sinful human aspects.
Yeah. And I think that's probably where it's going for there, because, like, like human passions of probably like enjoying like good food. They're like, there's nothing wrong with enjoying good food, but when you come into gluttony or like that, that's when it becomes like that human passion no longer becomes good, because transforms into sin, which is something like with many things that God has created, it's good, but sin becomes when you like also take it too far or take it too less. Both ways of you're not putting yourself aligned with what God had created it.
Right. I think along those lines, one thing that's mentioned here says, so as to live for the rest of the time in the flesh, no longer for human passions. So as to live for the rest of the time in the flesh, that it's, I think in that it's making out that don't live for those passions. So basically, it's the type of thing of, there are things that I gave you to enjoy, stuff that your body to enjoy, like how food tastes, amongst other things, but to live for that stuff is an issue. But and make sure that your focus is actually on the will of God and not on, don't, as you say, don't make those things the focus. It's good to enjoy those things because God gave them to us to enjoy, but don't have those be the focus of the things that we live for. We should live for doing what God desires, and those things are a bonus.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. So, go over to the part for like we were talking about like those human passions of like the sensuality, the passions, drunkenness, orgies, drinking parties, and lawless idolatry. Like he associates it with like what the Gentiles do of what the world's sort of religions say is okay for us to do.
Mm-hmm.
But Peter is saying here, like, no, that is not what you're supposed to do. There's a living of life that for God that does not involve those. And some of you would probably be like, oh, like I'm not being part of like orgies. I'm not doing lawless idolatries. Some people will probably go with passions or sensuality, trying to figure out which one of those two. But I think there's a lot of stuff here that in our culture that we would probably still do. Like, I think probably sensuality, drunkenness, and drinking parties are still an aspect of our culture that the Bible says don't be a part of that.
Right. I mean, it could also be a type of thing of it saying if this is almost kind of like what you focus on, then maybe you should, obviously, well, I guess repent, but maybe it should cause you to question where you place God in your life. 'Cause I guess I'm thinking more of I know someone who they say that they believe in God. They just they try to do the best they can, and then just hope it all works out in the end. But at the same time, they have usually when they drink beer, the purpose of it is to get drunk. Like they are not interested in drinking beer just for the sake of drinking beer. They want to get drunk.
Yeah.
I've mentioned this to them that it's like, well, I mean, if you're trying to do these other things you say you are, God does say not to get drunk. He's like, don't forget that. Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, something to consider about everything else you're saying.
Yeah, that is. It's one of those things. I can say like people are like, I'm good with the whole Bible until you start mentioning the parts I'm failing at.
Yeah.
But for it, parts I think here at the church is that we probably like the ones I'm thinking of is like drinking parties and sensualities of the church failing in two different ways. One is I would say with like sensuality, the church is people probably going with the LGBT community of saying like, hey, like this is okay to do, like this sort of lifestyle is like okay. And it's like for it, one is we do still need to accept them into the church, but the other part is that we also have to say that it is wrong for what it is, but still accept. Just as well as I'd say on the other side of the church is that we have people who go out and get drunk at drunk parties and then try to come back the next day to church. And we're like, those guys are cool. Those are guys are fine. And we don't criticize them for it. And so it's like we would call them like boys being boys and such. And it's one of those things of we have a lot of times churches will have gaps which they're not willing to address because it's convenient.
Right. I guess it'd also be a question of like whenever people partake in getting drunk and then coming to church the next day, do they feel guilty about the fact that they did that? If they don't, they just see it as part of how things are. That I could see it being something you would address more. But if they actually feel guilty about it, then it would suggest that there's a spiritual conviction that's going on there.
Yeah. And then I would also try to put on if they're getting drunk and then coming back would also be if they're doing it, would they be, if they're not feeling guilty about it, how would they feel about being labeled as a drunkard? Because that can sometimes also.
Chuckle.
Some people, I mean, I see some people be like, I'm okay with like drunkenness every so often, like it happens.
Right.
But the moment you start calling them a drunkard, that's when they start getting upset. That's when
Calling it. Okay. Okay. I was thinking you meant like you do it at these times and kind of chuckle, saying, "Yeah, that's happened." But
yeah,
as a lifestyle more so is what you're referring to.
Yeah, it's that part right there of like sometimes be the part there of sometimes the action might not be what they're feeling guilty about, but sometimes what they're doing with the label, with the shame that's involved with that, does as well.
Right. Although I would also say that, okay, like we were talking about with sensuality and saying along the lines of like say LGBT and stuff like that, that I would see that like someone struggles with that and you find that they gave in at different points, but then they come back. I would say that's that it's one thing, if you're. I guess what I'm thinking of is that I imagine that we would probably treat it very similarly, if you tend to just live in that and almost disregard the fact that it says not to. We would probably treat it the same as someone who tends to on a regular basis get drunk, and if you see that they start to become a thing, you eventually be like, dude, come on, what's going on now? You know what God says about this.
Yeah. And I think we probably should have like those conversations, but sometimes I think have those conversations and have church friends that would do it.
Right.
But build a body of believers that will do that. And I think for it, I just think of we have different church bodies that don't call that out as well in each other. So I feel like the parts where we have parts where certain churches will call out other churches for allowing like the LGBTQ to have their way in the church, while those churches will call out the drunkenness that's happening in the churches right there, and nobody's wanting to budge on what their body of believers are doing, because otherwise it looks shameful to be like, yeah, we're not perfect in this way, but we like to call out other people's.
So which one do you think that they're? If I think that's what you're getting at. Which one are you thinking that they're more likely to call out?
I was gonna say like, when is that certain like the church? I think most of the time the church is calling out the sensuality. But you would also have those churches will call out the drunkenness, and those churches that are calling them out for failing for believers in the way of sensuality. So you have like a church that has a problem with drunkenness, and you have a church that has a problem with sensuality, and with the believers on the inside. You have the people who have drunkards, we calling out to the church that's falling in the sin of sensuality, that they're falling into the sensuality, and then tell them to repent. And then the church that's falling in the sensuality will call out to the church that's in the drunkenness and be like, hey, you're doing this sin right here. And then they will just say like they're not being sinful, they're caring for the people in their broken state. in their church and not addressing the sin that's in their church, in the church.
So you're saying that both sides would be calling out the other one, but their defense would be that they're caring for the person and trying not to
offend.
judge. Okay, well, so I guess what I was thinking more along the lines of is saying that neither churches tend to, when you're dealing with the churches, that you're not necessarily dealing with one that delves more into sensuality or one that delves more into drunkenness, but you have people within the church who tend to struggle more with one or the other.
Yeah.
And so then you have other people who don't struggle with those things, but they are fellowshipping with these people, and you will learn that this is what they tend to do in their free time, or whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
And so how do we tend to respond to that? I actually think that we would have an easier time. I could be wrong, but I think we actually tend to have an easier time responding to the drunkenness than we do to the sensuality. When I think of sensuality, I'm thinking more of the LGBT, because I think that thing has become more so sensitive that we are afraid of how we might offend them. Whereas with drunkenness, it's just understood that's not supposed to be happening. Whereas the LGBT, that's become more of a confused matter of whether or not. When I say confused matter, I mean like confused matter for that individual of whether or not that should be acceptable to God. Whereas the drunkenness thing, not so much. So everyone understands that that's a bad thing. You just may enjoy it.
Yeah. I think for it, I agree with you partially there that for the LGBT.
I will add this. I think that wherever you're dealing with the church as a whole, they'll have an easier time They'll have an easier time condemning the LGBT aspect, and that probably not really address much of the drunkenness stuff. But in individual matters, it would probably be reversed.
Good. Yeah. For I see it's there are areas where I see it's so blatant that they're doing it, as you say, they're not condemning it and all in their churches and being hey, this is totally okay. I'm thinking of a group of the Methodist church, that when the Methodist church split apart between right there, where it's you can see that it's blatant right there. And I think for it, I've seen people call it out, and which is good for them to do. But I think
it's kind of ironic too.
Yeah.
Methodist church.
Yeah, but for it, I see a lot of the church at times calling out, be this is not godly, and you have practically churches kind of splintering in those areas, and the ones who have it aren't condemning it, and the ones who don't have it with them are condemning the ones who do. And they're pretty good at so far being we're not going to have this theologically. The Bible says this is a sin. But at the same time, you have it where you would have reports of people being drunk. You're not going to have probably a lot of the drunk parties, but you will have one of people in their work stuff drinking, or you will have college students going to drinking parties, and you'll hear the stuff about those kids being the ones that are hey, they're just trying things out. They made a bad decision, and not actually addressing those issues. Is that they make the excuse when it comes down to it with the drunkenness, and sometimes it's blatant, sometimes it's subtle. To be yeah, you're not going to see him drunk, but he's just going to go back home and get drunk and then not come out until he's sober. Right. I'd say it's more of a silent part right there. But now let's get to the part of how we deal with the world with it, because I think this is next verses is ones where we've talked mostly about how it interacts with the church. Now how we talk with those people who are outside the church, who are dealing with it. Because
verse 4, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, with respect to this, they are surprised when you don't join them in the same flood of debauchery, and they malign you.
Thing is, I don't know that's the thing that I find interesting with this. At least, I guess this might be a cultural issue. Maybe more of a cultural thing, because like today, in our culture, if you see if non-believers see Christians doing this, they start to question them. Like they know they've heard enough about Scripture to know what you should and shouldn't be doing in general. And they see you partaking in it. It's like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So it's like it actually hurts. It will hurt your witness whenever they find out, because they know what it says is like you either have some explaining to do, like explain your logic behind this, or they just see it as like, okay, so you're a hypocrite.
Yeah.
So I haven't so much heard of it as they will be surprised, and they will be surprised, and they will malign you for it. They'll make fun of you for it. But they will actually be it'd be for the reverse of if you actually partake in it.
They'll be like, they are surprised. They'll be paraphrasing. Would be, they are surprised when you join them in the same flood of debauchery, and they malign you. That's paraphrasing kind of what he does with the scripture right there. That's not actual what the scripture says right there. But just trying to clear what you're talking about. And in a way, it's like, I definitely do think of it a culture thing, because as some people who I've talked to who are in other cultures, when they have to deal with this, they get maligned for it. To be like, why didn't you want to go to this sort of concert? Why didn't you want to go to the party here? Why aren't you doing this religious thing that the rest of the culture is doing?
Right. Now, what I could see is if you've had a group of friends that you've been with for a long time, before you were a Christian, you would partake in this stuff, but after you became a Christian, you stopped, and then they make fun of it. And then they pick on you for it. Because basically you're no longer joining them, and it's just like, maybe they feel judged or whatnot. But yeah, that's usually when they'd be like, what's wrong with you now? So I could see along those lines.
Yeah. And the part here where probably they'd be like, you're a believer, and they've known you've practically been a believer for a long time. They're like, what's going on? Like, why did you do that, in the way of like giving into the human passions? And I think for it is part of how in our culture, how the morals of Christianity have flooded into people's concept of what is good and wrong. They just don't know it. or they don't want to accept it.
Right. Well, I mean, well, I'm not entirely sure if it's that, or if it could also be, the way we're looking at it is that they tend to disagree. They disagree with that belief, and so, but wherever they see you not obeying it, it's another way of just kind of shoving it in your face. It's like, I'm not a fan of this, but now that I see you're not doing this, I'm going to just mock you for it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the case or not, but I can see that. There's different other situations where just because, they may not believe in Scripture or whatnot, but they will mock you if you don't take it as seriously as they understand you should. They will mock you for it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I would agree with that. gives just a bit of a reason of the power of Christ to be like, people have an expectation of what you are to be as a Christian. They might not agree with it, but they still like see it. And they're have to deal with it in a way, but it might not be in a way that, as I was saying earlier, the part where for morals that Christianity has bled into their morals, right there, and claim it as themselves.
Right. At that point, they usually argue, it's not that we need God, we just already understand this to be wrong, just in general. Just like, okay, I'm glad you thought this too.
Yeah. Like, no, that's not how it is. Like, it was put that way for many centuries, and we have come to realize that this is good, and other people have taken it. It is a different thing to start thinking differently. You'll see that when you do, you come to different conclusions.
Oh, that did also bring about another thought that I have thought would essentially there's something that there's something that usually Christians are usually opposed to, but it more, I guess, within the past year, maybe two, I started to think that probably actually makes more well, so I guess in the sense of how we have how over time we've kind of gotten this understanding that these certain things are good, and so that's part of why the world will accept it, is because we do see it as good. At the same time, there's other situations where we will disagree with the idea of trying to make different scriptural commands laws for the land, because say we're not trying to make we should be making essentially the laws Christian. Almost, in a sense, they tend to look at like Christian nationalism, but at the same time, they say, well, we're not trying to make it to where everyone has to just follow the Bible. That people tend to see that as wrong, but I'm thinking for Christians, I'm not so sure that actually makes sense, because if we actually believe that God gave us these laws because He knows what's good for us, knows how we function best, it would make sense that we would actually be pushing for the different things that God commanded in Scripture for those to be law, for everything to work out. That doesn't mean you're going to be able to make them law, but the idea would be to get as close as you can to getting to that way of getting as close as you can to making the Scriptures, in a sense, the different things that God commands for how we live, making those law, because that would be better for us, rather than just suggesting that Christians live them out and that's it. We don't concern so much with making it to where the rest of that country lives by that stuff. It's like, well, do we actually believe that stuff is actually good for everyone in general? If we do, maybe if we actually believe, because one thing that we tend to say is like that the reason God gave us these commands because He knows what works best for humans, because He made us this way. So if we actually believe that, then maybe it would actually make more sense that we would be trying to put these into law, because this would actually be the best way for everyone to live.
Yeah. For it, I do think in the way of, like for us that we should, in a way, like look at the Bible, how the law was created to like try our best to be like to see what God has commanded, but also in a sense of there's other things that we don't do. Because if we do it, we would. I heard it said like we would, like for some laws, it'd be like, oh, how about we, like, if we do these laws, it'd be like we have to implement the laws of the Sabbath if we do all the laws there. And it'd be like, well, we have times where we do stuff on the Sabbath. Like, we went and ate at a restaurant, which was great. But the person there at the restaurants weren't, like, they were working.
Right.
And, like, we would not have been able to go out for the lunch there if it was, like, the Sabbath day. And it's one of those things of, like, you want to give it to them, but you also have to, like, some of the things you enjoy, you would have to give up.
Right. But, not like what's convenient. Because, I mean, at that point, because fortunately we used to have those laws, then we got more secular.
Yeah. Yeah, that is true. I'm thinking of, we should, yeah. I'm thinking of ones of like, okay, we should have like laws of like, hey, if somebody like steals something or somebody murders somebody, like those sort of laws there, this is how you should handle like land disputes. I mean, that's in like Leviticus and like the Old Testament there. But there are ways to implement it without, let's say, going over in our country, the ideology of freedom of religion. So where we create rules based from the Bible, but we don't at the same time like stamp out on other people of the freedom of religion, which is like, hey, put the 10 Commandments in every classroom. I don't think that is a good idea.
Probably wouldn't hurt.
Probably wouldn't. But I would.
We kind of screwed up since then.
So. I would put it that if you do, you have to put it in a way with the idea of freedom of religion that you would have other ones there, because either way, a lot of the time, a lot of people say they're going to give like freedom of religion, and they've put one focus in as like this covers everybody, but it is actually truly hard to do it because most people will be like they will put their thing as the most neutral ground. So like if the secular, it would be like evolution is like the most basic of it all. Like you can't get offended by that. But actually, yeah.
Most people know you can.
Yeah.
Today.
Yeah. But it would
that's
be.
That's not validity system, whether or not you're crazy.
But for it, it would be probably better to have a thing where it'd be like, hey, have different. I right now thinking of a lot of people who would be like, oh, the LGBTQ people are coming into schools and teaching kids about gender and such things, like at an earlier time. And I think probably, or one is like definitely push it back later, but have something where you can teach different points of that and get it across to be like, hey, this topic is going to come up. For these days, the next 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about it in this manner of like LGBTQ. If you want to, like for the parents, you can abstain your kids from this. But at the same time, then be like, then the next 2 weeks, we're going to talk about like the Christian aspect of it. And people can send their letters and for be like, we want to abstain from that. Which is probably would be the proper way to do it, where you are giving people that have the freedom of religion without putting one down the throat of everybody right there.
But which one's good?
I'll go with like the Christian, but with our basis of freedom of religion, that you don't want to have it at a situation where you're forcing a religion down, because that means that
right. So, but then at that point, what you're getting at is that one of those leads into a proper way of living, and another one does not.
What proper way? But I would also put for that, then Christianity becomes hollow.
What do you mean?
That you will have people who go through that, and then they won't. They'll be like, well, yeah, I know the Ten Commandments, I'm Christian, and they don't actually see who Jesus is. It's what I would call, like, we would call cultural Christians.
Yeah. Well,
which is still as bad, I would say, bad as an unbeliever, like, because they don't believe.
Right.
And so, but they will say all the right things, but they don't believe. You get value.
I mean, that's only if you actually there would be a distinction between believing in Christ and living out the way that God designed for people to live out.
Yeah.
You can live out how God designed people to live out and still not be a Christian, and that would be a distinction that needs to be made. I mean, that's still a distinction that needs to be made for Christians generally. It's like, just be, make sure you're properly aligned with Christ, and don't get it mixed up that just because you're living this out and don't actually believe is that, basically what you're saying. But but it also helps to make a good distinction, that just because you are following this doesn't mean that you're a Christian. And where sometimes people get confused with that just in general.
Yeah. But
you have kids who they grew up in a Christian household, and so they tend to believe they're Christian.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, there's a distinction here. It's the same thing, really.
Yeah.
There's a good way of living.
Yeah, there's
a good and proper way of living. Just because you're not Christian doesn't mean you don't follow it.
Yeah, and that's the part where I'm trying to get. You're trying to give them still a good, proper way of living, but you're not trying to, at the same time, get them to think lightly of Christianity. So if you put into laws and such that are good, based in the Bible, and people are taught about it and are raised in it, then they look out and see at religions, they see at beliefs, they can compare from there to be like, hey, Christianity is good.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've seen it do good here. Like, I'm going to see what Christianity is. Not if you have it go that the laws, and then you have it be like, hey, we are going to, in our schools right here, be like, we're going to go do the 10 Commandments. You will have it that the belief is more in the school of where faith comes, and that you believe that because you were raised with a part of like saying that these commandments come from like in the school, that they would presume that they're already Christians when they come across, be like, hey, like, what's this about Muslims? What's this about Buddhists? And be like, but I'm a Christian right here, but they're not. They've just gotten the commandments for it and an association of God without having the relationship with Jesus.
No, I don't think that would be necessarily the case, because a household can have a Christian set of rules. That doesn't mean the kids are Christian.
Yeah.
They will eventually find out that they're not Christian. They've just been following these rules. It's the same type of thing. It's like, I wouldn't say it makes it shallow. Actually, it would challenge. Okay, so what actually makes you Christian?
Because the moment that you put right there, I've said probably for most people, I think becomes a difference, is that even though they've been raised in a Christian household, I've seen more people be like, yeah, my parents are Christian, so I'm Christian.
Right.
And then they just live their life saying they're Christian, but they're not going to go to church and be conflicted with that reality that I need to make the decision to follow Christ.
So you're saying it'd be preferable that they live a bad lifestyle before they come to Christ?
No, I'm saying that the aspect that you're saying is, hey, you have like Christian families, and then like raised in those Christian life, and say what you were again, how you said it again, the way you said it.
So that they live in a Christian household, and some of them might believe that they grew up Christian because of that, but they actually, what it does is it challenges. Okay, what is this? You're not Christian because of these, because you follow these rules. You need because you believe that, then there has to be a correction. It helps you get deeper of, okay, what does it actually mean to be a Christian? It wasn't just following these rules. Just because you follow them doesn't mean you're a Christian. It might have been something else I had mentioned.
Yeah. But I mean, for it, that's the part there where you get conflicted with the commands and such. I'd say most people don't. I would say some people don't actually get conflicted with the commands. They just be like, this is what my parents taught. I'm not, because they say they're Christian. I'm a Christian also. And they just do their things without actually going to the other aspects of like looking at their faith. Your one goes is that because their parents are Christians and how they taught right there of like with these commands, that we are going to be in the assumption that they are going to question that their faith, to be like, I have to look at Christianity. For me, I had the, like, part of it is I had a youth pastor who, like, be conflicted with that probably mindset a bit, because he was like, this is not the faith of your parents. You have to make this your own faith. You've had somebody come in to that people's life to be like, hey, you've got to switch it. You have to make this your own.
Right, sure.
But I saw the people who weren't also doing that start to fade away, even though their parents were believers, but they were they still followed more of that. It was because of the rules and what their family did above them that they said that they were Christian, but sometimes they don't.
They didn't have clarity.
Yeah, they didn't have clarity at that time. And so they would say they're Christian, but you don't know until until you start asking them, and then you get to the part that my parents are Christian, so I'm a Christian.
Yeah, sure.
And that's more of the church people in the church who are believers confronting them than the actual the parents. I would say teaching those commands, and I think that's just something that says on our part that we're kind of bad at teaching our kids how God's commandments so that they believe instead of just it's because my parents are.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I'm wanting to make sure we do get it right, because we've had it where the next generation says they're Christian because their parents are Christian, and they were taught this certain way about commandments in a way that they believe that they're Christians, but they're not. I want to make sure that we get to the part where we're teaching the part down correctly so that they know that just because your parents are Christians, that you're not Christians. And I fear that if we do it that sort of way in schools, it's going to repeat the same way. If we be like, hey, put the 10 Commandments in, it's like, this is the same situation before where you get cultural Christians.
I mean, having cultural Christianity is not bad, but you do need to make sure there's clarity in what that looks like for the individual.
Yeah. I was like, for cultural, if you look at it culturally wise, cultural Christianity shouldn't be bad. But when you look down to it of what Christianity is, I have to say it's on the level of false teachers.
What do you mean?
It's so close, but it's not the truth.
Cultural Christianity?
Yep.
What are you talking about?
Saying because I am in a family that's Christian, I'm a Christian as well. Or when people in the past for a little bit be like, oh, if you go to America, everybody's going to be Christian there.
Mm-hmm.
There's this aspect that you expect yourself to be Christian when you're not. And in the end, when you get to the judgment seat, does cultural Christianity save you?
So you're saying it's better to make sure that you live in a world that does not honor Christ, so that we can be sure that you at least know where you stand.
No, I'm saying...
Because that's where the distinction would be.
I'm saying it's better to have people know who they are in Christ than people who say, I'm honoring Christ, but I have no relationship with Christ.
I don't know. I mean, I get what you're saying. I'm not think that it's dumb. I get what you're saying about how it's important that they know the distinction. But I do think I think that the trouble that you probably run into more, like when people see that, oh, because my family was this way, I am this way. That was a failure on, there wasn't enough education going on. Unfortunately, what we actually have dealt with within Christian culture is there's a lot of I don't know, ignorance would be the right word, but we have not done a good job of trying to educate on how to appropriately think about things, and it has bitten us in the butt a lot.
Yeah.
Part of it has to do with that, is that is that, like you say, because they grew up in a family that was Christian, they automatically believe that they were Christian. It's like, well, if their parents instilled in them, you're following these rules, but this does not make you a believer. There's a distinction here. If their parents didn't do that, that was, and from my understanding, a lot of parents didn't. That was the bigger issue. It wasn't that the kids just believed it. It was that the parents didn't do their job of making a distinction.
Yeah.
Here's the case. They needed to do a lot better job of educating their kids on here's how this works. And so now, if you want to go into the, I guess, bigger aspect of like, okay, let's say you put this in public schools. Let's say that you have a whole set of family who's not really Christian. They don't really believe, but they do follow this just because this is what they were taught. I'm not so sure that would be a type of thing of. If they did believe they were Christian, with that, but at the same time, it's very possible that if they were to believe that stuff, then maybe it would also push them to go to church, just because that's just, in a sense, a cultural thing. But at the church, it's also important that you made the distinction of these rules themselves don't make you a Christian.
Yeah.
And so it's probably much more a lack of education that the church has not been very good at. That they haven't been very good at educating people on the distinctions of this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, for the part where you put down the example of, hey, they might believe they are and they're not, but for the culture, they just go to church is like still a good thing in the right direction of like, hey, like if everything goes down, they have something that they'll lean on to, and then they'll find Christ that way. But I do agree for the part that we've not done a good job at it. And I think that's part of the point that I'm trying to get at is it feels like we're like, hey, we're not teaching them the correct way. So we're going to implement the things into law that were taught down that was not very good at explaining the difference between belief. It's for me, it sounds like we're repeating. We recognize like the issue. We like, hey, it wasn't taught that well from parents to kids about their faith.
Right.
And they put like this, like say prayer, they had this thing, they had like these three things to teach their kid about Christianity, but they didn't mention Christ or anything like that. And so they grew up believing that they're Christian, which is we're going to keep teaching these three things and we're going to implement that at a wider scale. And it's like, you're just trying to, you're trying to throw the square peg into the circle hole repetitively and saying we're doing it different every time. The block is going to hit differently this time.
I guess, so the issue I would see is it's not like this didn't happen before. And this was actually something God commanded, specifically in the Old Testament. He did have a whole nation live by his rules. And if they didn't, that was a problem. And it wasn't like all of them who lived in this society that God designed were going to, basically, once they died, they were going to be with him. It wasn't like that, but they still lived by that.
Yeah.
So I think there was probably a distinction. I imagine there's a distinction enough of them understood of the difference. And it's possible that because it was a cultural thing that maybe some of them did get sucked into, because I live this out, I live by this, that I am this way, and there was, I imagine there's enough of a distinction, but they just didn't grasp it. But I don't think that just because, I'm getting more, I get what you're talking about, where it's like, we don't need to be, it's a bad thing to reattempt it and assume it's going to turn out differently. I think that's pretty much what you're getting at.
Yeah.
And so my thinking with it is that I think that the fact that we have leaned more into we shouldn't, in a sense, make Christian laws is more of a secular way of looking at things.
Yeah.
Because that has more of a mindset of there's a distinction between the world God made and the world we live in, and they're actually one and the same. We just aren't living the way God intended to do things. So if we were to live closer to that, it would just be better in general. And to say that we shouldn't be pushing for that is like, okay, how does that even make sense? But there should be a distinction between, okay, just because you live the way God intended for things doesn't mean you actually have salvation. And that does need to be a distinction, but it's not, and I wouldn't think that it's enough to say that because we want to make sure that there's that distinction, we shouldn't push to that to make sure we're living that way. That we actually have laws that would be pushed for that, because that is a better way.
Yeah.
That's a better way of living. It's just, if anything, what it stresses more is that we need to do a better job of actually teaching the distinctions. If we don't teach the distinctions, that's actually just laziness all in general. There's a lack of education in general on what we actually believe. It's good to follow laws. The laws don't save you, but they are better for you, but they don't save you. So it's good to be able to make those distinctions, and part of the way you make those distinctions is you implement that, and then you have to explain, okay, just because you live by this, it is better, but it doesn't actually bring you fellowship with Christ. But it is a way He intended for you to still live a better life.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that, and like just thinking of all the times that, like, in the Old Testament, Israel turned back, and God was glad for that. But I think of all the times that it sounded like there were still some frustrations in it. Would be like, oh, they kept the high places and the Asher pole, but everybody still kept, like, people were making sacrifices. People were trying to seek God, and sometimes even in those time periods, God will call them out for, like, so you're seeking me, but you're following all these the sacrifices and all, but you're still not getting the point.
Right. So since you remain secular enough, we've now got a problem.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing now.
I mean, I can see a part. I can see a part right there. Be like, we've got to. There's definitely parts there, like, careful of letting, like, the secular part come in, because for it, I'm just like, I don't know, but for it to be like, hey, 10 Commandments probably not in schools is a good idea, but to say that gay marriage is a right thing, I'd say that's not a good thing to put in. And, like, say gay marriage is okay. Like, I would, if I had probably the parts of it to write the law, I would definitely be like, if you give me the opportunity, I will, like, say, like, we have to, like, gay marriage is wrong. I will do that. But for it's one of those things of we should probably change the law to match what God says.
Right. I mean, that's the long lines of how I would see it, is that because that's right now generally the common thing. I'd be like, what would you do about gay marriage? Like, that's banned. And that's not just banned because it makes me uncomfortable. It's banned because that's not good for the person who's living in that lifestyle. And so we're just trying to make it for, obviously God designed a certain way. Just because you don't like it doesn't mean that's not there for you. So it also doesn't make you say that you follow.
Yeah.
So there's a distinction,
Yeah. Yeah, therefore it's, for me, is like, it's sort of hard to at times describe of the part of, like, we need to implement God's law, but we also need to be, like, careful of how we do it.
Because there's another thing that, when thinking about, because, it's the thing of, if you allow the secular aspect of things, and then, because at least now they can make the distinction between, do you actually have a relationship with Christ, at the same time, God destroyed cities because they delved into that. They could tell the difference, but they delved into that secular. They delved into not obeying God, and it was enough for God to destroy them because they weren't doing things how He designed. Yeah. So that's kind of how I tend to see stuff along those lines. Of I think that we've kind of almost missed the mark on how we're supposed to handle how should laws be. And I don't think we're going to actually be able to do it. Like, have these laws be the case, because none of the people think that way. But I think it's good to try and get as close to that as possible. Yeah. And just because it's better for society, and it's one less way to get judged by God. Yeah. We're doing this for your sake, for all of us. The salvation aspect, we will definitely deal with that, but let's also at least try to reach where everyone's living a better life in general, just because that's what God wants us to help everyone else be prosperous. Like He has made.
I agree with that part. Now back to the Bible verses. This is probably going to be all one episode. No different sessions. We're lumping it all together. Mm-hmm. You're probably putting the footnotes. Parts right there. It's all one. It was good because I was going to have a problem discussing what to discuss afterwards. So this is actually perfect. Law, Christianity into law, into the government with laws. Right. So for verse 6 and 5. For they will give account to Him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. For this is why the gospel is preached even to those who are dead, that though they are judged in the flesh, the way people are, they might live in the spirit the way God does. And that gets into probably the bigger part that God judges you currently and your past at the same time. Is like for those who are dead, they've already made their decisions. You would probably say they're set in stone. The living are kind of in this action of they're making their choices and such now.
That's not what it's saying. It's saying the gospel is preached even to those who are dead. That though judged in the flesh the way people are, they might live in the spirit the way God does. I'm assuming where he's saying dead because of that he's actually referring to people have actually literally died.
I'm checking the footnote here.
Because if you're saying even to those who are dead, as if you have people who are alive and those who are dead. This is the way he's making it out. It's weird, but it does seem to be a distinction. It also seems to follow back to to the previous chapter, where he talks about how he went. That for Christ also, in verse 18 of the other chapter, he says, "For Christ also suffered once for sin, for the unrighteous, that He might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which He went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey God, when God's patience waited in the days of Noah."
Yeah.
There's talking about how He went to, I think it was.
Some people would probably say hell, or the different spot that was in between of waiting for when Jesus would come. That's
what it's making it sound like with this. It's like it's almost like referring back to that.
Mm-hmm. Because I think probably for most people go for the dead are those people some people go who don't believe are dead in their transgressions, and the gospel is still preached to those people who are walking dead. And so to give them that they might live the Spirit the way God does is that God's Spirit will dwell in them.
Yeah, the footnote says, yours probably says the same thing. It says, for verse 6, although some maintain that fear offers a second chance after death for those who rejected Christ, this view is untenable since it contradicts both the clear teaching of Scripture throughout the rest of the Bible. In the immediate context concerning the importance of perseverance of believers in the coming judgment of the living and the dead, given the immediate context, those who are dead refers to Christians to whom the gospel was preached when they were alive, but who have since died. This fits the meaning of the dead, even though the believers will experience physical death. They are judged in the flesh. People are. Believers who have died live in the Spirit the way God does.
That will probably be going to the way of that. The dead and those in the flesh are going to be judged the same way. Like there's not going to be a special sort of judgment for those who are walking and those who are dead. To be like, oh, if you died, you don't get the same sort of judgment that the person who's living is if Christ comes back. Because if you died, well, you've got these other things that you've got to worry about. Or a person who's in the flesh would be like, well, why are you comparing me to somebody who's dead? Because I've got these, because if I'm the person who's dead, already have all their stuff put away, and you can say that I'm having to compare myself to somebody who's good and dead. Like, what about me? I'm right now living. Probably a bad thing.
I don't think the footnote makes sense, to be honest. I get what they're saying. I don't think it makes sense with the verse. The best I can see with the verse is almost seems like what they're referring to people in the Old Testament who didn't have a chance to hear Christ, or didn't have a chance to, didn't specifically believe in Christ, but believed that there's something that was going to happen, and he preached even to those who had been dead or who were dead from that time. Yeah. That they might, I guess, they're just in flesh, but at least they'll be alive in the Spirit with God. That's how that makes more sense to me. Not suggesting that, because this makes it sound like it's those who were alive at least during Christ's time and they believed in Him, and now they're dead, but they will still be able to, that they'll still be able to enjoy Him or live with Him. It's like, well, obviously that's what they always understood. I don't see why you're making a distinction with them, those who are dead. That's a weird distinction to make, I think. If you're referring to someone who did specifically believe in Christ and knew it was Christ, it would make more sense. I would think that they're referring to people in the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because you get the impression, I think, here and maybe somewhere else, that Christ would actually go and preach to the dead. He almost like went to the underground and preached to that.
I'm right now going to check up a different translation, right? Right now, because I'm pretty sure we both have ESV.
Yeah.
Right there. And so I'm going to see if there's like a different translation that will give us different context. So this is the King James. For this cause was the gospel preached also to them that are dead, that they may be judged according to men in the flesh, but live according to God in the Spirit. Then, for this cause was the gospel preached also to them that are dead, that they might be judged according to men in the flesh, but live according to God in the Spirit. then I'm going to go with an amplified NSAB, then I'm going to go with like an amplified version. NSAB. For the gospel has for this purpose been preached even to those who are dead, that though they are judged in the flesh as men, they may live in the spirit according to the will of God. And I'm going to go with an amplified version. Those are, not only would they try to explain things out a bit longer and be a bit more wordy. For this is why the good news of salvation was preached in their lifetimes, even to those who are dead, that they were judged in the flesh as men are. They may live in the spirit according to the will and purpose of God. I'm going to go for Amplified Classic. I'm going to a lot of different versions here. For this is why the good news, the gospel, was preached in their lifetime, even to the dead, that though judged in fleshly body as men are, they might live in the spirit as God does.
I think that's the way each one is being worded. They're making more of a distinction in that verse than that footnote's making between dead and living.
Yeah.
There's a little too much distinction. It's like even the dead are. It's like, well, so according to what the footnote, like our Bible are saying, it's like, okay, once we are dead, even Christ died, preached to us when we were dead. It's like, well, we already know about this. So
yeah.
I was like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So it seems like it's too much of a distinction to say even to the dead. So, okay, so they're dead before Christ even walked on the earth. Therefore, old covenant. And so he preached to them. So that way they would, and I'm imagining those who he preached to were the ones who already believed, are trusted in the coming Savior. And so it was his way of saying, I'm here.
Yeah. Then for the next part, the end of all things is at hand. Therefore be self-controlled and sober-minded for the sake of your prayers. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Show hospitality toward one another without grumbling. So those three verses right there. The first part, and this is sort of like characteristics of a believer still as well. And it's kind of like the final notes things. And one of them is the part of self-control and sober-minded. And sober-minded is something that Peter has repeated in this book, is the aspect of sober-minded.
Right, having clarity.
Yeah. Like, because it sounds like he doesn't want you to have this aspect of it being emotional, drunk people being drunk in these choices of walking, of believing, because probably many people have probably been like, yeah, I follow Apollos, I follow Artemis, and it's because they were in like a drunken party.
What?
I'm just thinking probably during that time period, where we had, probably if you went into a town and they're like, yes, our deity is like Apollo. Would you like to join us for the celebration of Apollo in the town square where we're going to have like orgies or drunk parties right there? And people will be like, yeah, of course. If there's food, booze, and whatever, like they will join and be like, of course, this is awesome. I'll believe this. And it's like, nope, you are not going to believe this possibly for either the emotional high or if you true drunkenness, like your emotional state is twisted. not twisted, but not fully aligned.
It's kind of seeming like this is up to verse 6 is like 1 through 6 is its own train of thought. And then he's switching to a different train of thought in verse 7. It sounds like you're continuing the train of thought in verse 7.
Yeah. It is one of those things of where it's the first part is where it's, I think, interacting more with unbelievers.
Then all things at hand, or
verses between 1 and 6.
oh, right, okay.
And the part there where in verse 7 says, then if all things is at hand, therefore, and so because of that, therefore, that the end is all things is at hand.
Right.
This is more of like the proper way you should behave.
Be self-controlled and sober-minded for the sake of your prayers.
When I hear that, I think of, wasn't it earlier where Peter was saying like to the husbands to be, hey, make sure like you're not hindering or harming your wife, or else your prayers could be hindered. Showing honor.
Yeah. In verse
So,
7 of chapter 3, likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as weaker vessels, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered.
Yeah. So the part of being self-controlled and sober-minded seems to be also a big aspect of how your prayers can be affected. And I can definitely agree with that, because it's just like, the more, if you're not self-controlled or sober-minded, your mind starts to think of different things, and it starts to no longer align with God. That God's like, I'm not going to be listening to you for your prayers if your mind is over here. You're walking in a different path, and it's your mind.
Right. I imagine that. Yeah. Self-control is part of it is referring to don't give into the flesh, to your temptation. Mm-hmm. Make sure you're self-controlled that way. If you're not self-controlled, then you're making it to where God's not as interested in listening to what you have to say. Or, because of the sake of your prayers. And so, yeah, being self-controlled, so having your sins taking control of that and not giving into sin, and making sure you have clarity of thought. That also goes. That's the same thing as I think whenever he says to. What is it? It's basically where we talk about take control of your thoughts. Paul talks about it. What is it?
I think personally, take your thoughts captives. It does. It sounds familiar right there.
Yeah.
At first, I thought it was Romans 12:2, but then I was like, thoughts captives. It does sound something like in Philippians, Colossians, or Ephesians.
Okay. And I can see that being along the lines of, sober-minded. You are, because you're taking your thoughts captive. At the same time, it's kind of like it's clarity of mind.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least along those lines. It may not be specifically just that. It might be that, but that's an aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
But basically making sure you're in control. And in control in the sense of following Christ. In both, I guess, your actions and your thoughts. So that way your prayers will be listened to. you'll have better communion with and fellowship with the Lord.
Mm-hmm. So, with that, I guess the next part is, above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. And I think that is sort of reminds me of John 13:34. New commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I loved you, you also to love one another. By this you'll know you're my disciples, if you love one another. And then, because I'll have to know if the verse 9, show hospitality towards one another without grumbling, is in line with that for how to love one another. But if I think the love one another is its own single command right there. He's just listing off commands. This is a part that is crucial to like a believer's faith, and you see it with like John's writings of him putting that in, and then that John also mentions how important it is in his other letters to the churches, like 1 John, 2nd, 3rd John, and kind of, I think with Peter also pointing out that it was something that Jesus was serious about in his teaching, that we love one another, and where Peter's putting it above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins.
It's an interesting phrase.
Right.
Keep loving each other earnestly, because it covers a multitude of sins. I guess covers a multitude of sins is an interesting phrase. That's what I should say.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess what do you think that looks like?
I think the part where that since love covers a multitude of sins is the aspect of that even if a sin happen, it should by definition like probably break a relationship. To be like, hey, like I stole something from you, you would probably be like this, our friendship is over because I stole something from you. But love would be the part where it's like, I know, okay, so you stole something from me, because I care for you, I'm going to continue this relationship. It's not one of those things that is going to break it. And I think I was reading the book like Ministering Honor and Shame Societies, and in those they were talking about how relationships are very important.
Mm-hmm.
And if one of those acts, like it would say a sin or something was done wrong, pops up, people are afraid that if you directly talk about it, that's going to break up the relationship. And so they will talk indirectly about it.
Indirectly about the sin?
About the sin, or get to the point to be like, so that to make sure that the relationship is fine as it digs down into what happened. To be like, hey, like, I think like the example that they give was their kid had found scissors and had given herself an impromptu haircut, and there was a babysitter there. Mm-hmm. And the part that he wanted to communicate that it was bad that she allowed the kid to get like the scissors and let her do that.
Mm-hmm.
But the person was avoiding directly saying like, hey, I I was directly involved with the kid getting the scissors. You're like, oh, she just found scissors. Not mentioning how the kid was like, yeah, we did a haircut together. Like that the babysitter was actually more involved with it.
So the babysitter left out that she was more involved with it?
Left out that part, and then would still skirt around the fact that she had done part of it, but is acknowledging that it was bad that the scissors and the haircut, but afraid that by the acknowledgement of that she was a part of it
mm-hmm.
would threaten the relationship. And for it, he had to come to that realization later on. And the next time he talked with her, had to clarify from the beginning that this wasn't going to hurt the relationship. And then things went smoother from there. And so the part that where love would be something that you don't have to fear that the relationship is going to be broken because of something that you did wrong.
Right.
And so the part that because you love, it will cover the sin where you can admit that you at the same time did something wrong.
Right. So I mean that makes sense. I guess the other thing I was thinking of, because I think this is probably not as much thought of along these lines, because usually when it says love covers multitude of sins, it's usually the mindset is how can we best make things work out? How well can we, in that sense of like how can we love each other so we think or just things go smooth enough to where you don't have to concern too much over. You can rely on the fact that they love you, that it will pan out in the end. The other way I would see it is that another thing that love does is it tells the truth. And so whenever you tell the truth about stuff, how does that make sense? Because it says that it covers multitude of sins, but yet if you were to tell the truth out of love, and make sure that it's said in a way that comes across that it's loving, but it is also being honest about something that's going on with the person that's actually challenging them on a sin or whatever. That how is it that would seem like it would cover that love in that way covers a multitude of sins? Because the way it's saying in here is love covers a multitude of sins. There's a lot of screwing up going on because we love each other. We can kind of pan that stuff out. We'll get past this. But how would that work out with you're telling them the truth in love, even though it stings? How would that make sense with it covers a multitude of sins? Unless it's because it's told in love that they trust that you have their best in mind with that, even though it stings. That they trust that you have your best in mind so that they can. And trusting that it's out of love. That it helps that trust, basically, I guess. I guess I'm more so just thinking of not so much the compassionate love as much as the difficult loving things you have to do. How that would also make sense with what it's talking about here. I assume that would be included in it.
Yeah. I think for those are both different ways of love, and think it's one of those things of where you have to kind of see how it works, because one aspect that I seem like you're getting at with like speaking truth right there, and that is the aspect of, hey, if you're doing something wrong, I want to, it'll be loving for me to tell you that you're doing something wrong. But at the same time, if I don't do it in a way that makes you realize that you are loved, that can be viewed as very harsh or something that's not very loving. And I think, but if I go into the aspect of like, I'm trying to also, as I said, with like you loving one another, is like you're trying to keep the relationship right there, and you're trying to get the message across that, hey, like no matter what you did, like I'm starting off that I value this relationship, that I love it, that like there's nothing going to tear it apart right there, and so I can bring this message to you that something was done wrong. But I would say my thing would be that I could forget to bring truth into it right there. And it's one of the aspect of, you need to bring both into it right there. Otherwise, what's going to happen is, one is you're going to be so, you can possibly be forgetting in the love aspect that you're not considering the relationship or them. And then the other ways that you're considering them so much that you're not willing to speak truth to them as well.
Yeah. It's also possible that, while that is obviously an aspect of love, it may that may not be what this is referring to. That this has more to do with, if someone is doing something that hurt or whatever, that's what this is. That's more so what this is covering. Is like, just make sure that you guys keep loving or caring for each other earnestly, so that way when screw-ups do happen, you believe it to be with the best of intentions.
Yeah.
And so that's where that you're trusting that love is can overlook how that was handled.
Yeah.
And just trust that it was done with the right heart, or with the intent for the right heart.
Yeah. Then it goes into show hospitality towards one another without grumbling. And this part, I think the Western world does really bad at. Because I was reading and stuff in my book about how, like, hospitality is a major aspect in a lot of the different cultures. And, like, hospitality, even in areas that we'd be like, you don't need to be hospitable in that time period or in that situation, where this family had the father die, and the son was now in charge to run the family, but everybody else was coming to pay their respects to it, and they had to host all of them as they kept coming in. And if you looked at the finances, they were getting into financial trouble because they were having to host everybody for that, because they kept coming, and he knew a whole lot, and the son was not yet at the financial level of probably his dad was,
Right,
to probably work that off. And so for them, it would be a level of, like, for him, it was, we would say that was a bad situation like the culture should have said like, hey, hold back for the hospitality, but people would also say that you kind of, it was expected for the hospitality because they were honoring you so much, they're honoring your father so much that you are still expected to like show that hospitality.
And this
But
was another country?
Another country, but I would say, and that's just like a level of like in like large amount of hospitality that I think we miss as a culture. And I'm still sort of reading about it, so I don't have all the answers yet, but I'm just throwing that idea out there that there might be an aspect of hospitality that we don't quite fully understand, but yet we're going to probably talk about it from a Western point of trying to hospitality towards one another without grumbling. What do you think that means?
My first thought when I read hospitality was money.
Mm-hmm.
It was like helping out, monetarily with stuff, which actually I think that we tend to. That's where I think the West tends to, or at least the U.S. I guess tends to, from what I understand, do very well with. That we tend to be one of the more giving in those regards, but that might not. That's just like the first one that comes to my mind is that giving money aspect. But when it comes, I guess hospitality, in other ways would just mean like giving your time and of your things to be able to be willing to help people out. And that one may have more to do with it's different. I'm not sure if it'd probably vary vary by location or place that you are, how people behave. Like I've heard in the sense that people in Texas tend to be supposedly at least nicer than some other states. But in general, I'm sure you just get varying places where people are either more giving of their time or their stuff than other places are, and more willing to help out in different situations. I mean, to some extent, where like right as you go to say Mexico, it's a very different situation. It's almost like, well, it's part of what I have heard. This may be a bad example of it, but you want to make sure that you do not accidentally get hit by someone in a vehicle, because if you do end up getting hit, since there's no appropriate insurance or they can get in trouble, if you get hit and you're on the ground, they will just make sure that you're fished, that they kill you. So because if they don't do that, then if the police come or whoever it is comes and deals with the situation, that person's going to be in serious trouble, and it's just easier. Or because I guess the person survives, they can either fight it or they can gain a lot from it. And so apparently in that culture, they see it as if you do hit them, just make sure you kill them, so that way nothing bad happens to you. That's something I've heard from guys at work who have family when they've been there, they have family there, and they have been in Mexico different times, and they were aware that that's how their mentality is about that. In that sense, it's dark. Yeah. But so in that sense of hospitality, it's lacking.
Yeah.
So that's like an extreme version of what I heard. It's like, just be sure don't get hit by somebody if they try. That happens. Get up real quick and run. So if you're able to. But yeah. So there's that kind of thing. I mean, I guess yeah. Like I said, the first thing I thought was like getting money. And in general, I think that the church tends to be pretty good at that. Mm-hmm. Honestly, I think the church in general tends to be pretty good with hospitality, because they're usually the ones you can go to whenever you need help with stuff. And they're usually, from what I understand, they're usually pretty good about being willing to help out different people who come. Specifically strangers, what I'm thinking of, I guess.
Yeah.
people in need. Like granted, another example I can think of where it could be a toss-up in that sense. Like I remember with something that I heard with my uncle. He is a pastor, but it was in a different. He was pastoring a different church at the time, and he was always really good about anyone who was either homeless or just coming in desperate need of money for whatever reason, that he would go and bring him the money from like tithe. And there'd be people who were part of the staff who were not thrilled that he would always just do that. That I guess it was always a question. I guess maybe make sure that it's legit or. And for one, he's a pastor of a small church, so it could be a bit more of like, do we have the money for this type of thing? But he always just felt compelled, like they're in need, we just need to help them out. And so that's where he would have an easier time with that. But sometimes people who were part of the staff, who were part of the finance and stuff like that, they would have more issues with it. But he would still do it. And so there's that. I can see that aspect where not everyone was as willing to give.
Yeah.
And so I can see that maybe in church you can have that type of thing where, and I imagine usually the pastors usually more willing to give than the people who deal with the finances because they see.
Yeah.
Like we can't really.
Yeah.
So. But in general, I get the impression that it's usually easier to find help from a church. They're usually more willing to help out as much as they can. For one, they see it as a good evangelism opportunity.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I would probably agree more with the latter part of that, to be like your uncle there, because I would say it involves more of yourself than just money.
Mm.
I think it's more of, as you said, the time and resources, because it's not one of those. I don't think it's the giving part fully right there to be like, oh, we give a lot of money to ministries and all. I think it's more of the part where you're actually bringing them in. So if like the people at church to be like, hey, come over, we're going to host these things like for people that you practically meet probably at church or something, to be like, I will help and provide for you in like when you're here with me at my house. And part of that, the hospitality, is inviting in. And so I would say the part of like giving, I think, misses the part right there of that we say America gives a whole lot, which equals to hospitality. I think that like misses the point of hospitality, where yes, we do give a whole lot, but yeah, hospitality is more of taking in people.
That is why I was saying I think the church is pretty good with that. But I guess what I'm referring to is like with the church building, that they're usually pretty good at bringing people in and trying to help them out with stuff.
Yeah.
Almost like that's a safe haven for people to go to. And it's not specifically like with the congregation at their houses, but at least the church building, you can come in and get help from there. That's where they kind of gather all the resources they have to be able to help people out. And so it's usually an easier time hospitality-wise to go there and expect to be able to get help out with whatever you're needing and stuff along those lines. Not necessarily, perhaps unfortunately, from the congregation, but at the same time, usually I think what it is that the congregation puts money in there and expects that you're going to be using that money to be able to get stuff to show hospitality, and not like just giving money, but giving of aid or of furniture and stuff like that, and be able to help them out in different ways along those lines. Because that's usually what that idea is for money. There is, how can we use this to pay for either if someone's behind the bill and they're like, desperate, or if if they're needing food or any of these other things, that's usually where they're pouring the money into there, and sometimes even other extra stuff. we'll get to that in case someone comes in and they could use that. So it seems like, from what I can tell, the church seems to be pretty decent about doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and the part that you mentioned there, that they expect the church to do it, I think is, like, it's good for the church to do it, but it's also, I think, bad on the congregation. I think depend all on the church for it when they themselves are the church. And so they probably think for themselves, like, the church is doing that, so I'm doing that. Which is, like it is, like, good in the sense of, like, I'm giving the church so the church can do it. And if the church is doing it, like, the help of hospitality, then by my association with it, I'm doing that. But it can also be said probably in the reverse way of, if the church, like with teaching, shepherding the flock, and you're not doing hospitality, that goes back to the church, because the church doesn't do hospitality, or vice versa. That you have to, individual members need to show hospitality as well. And I have to go with your uncle's finance team. That sounds like where most of the grumbling comes from, is right there. And I think for that should probably be a part in our hearts that we should probably look into, if the part that the money amount is causing us to grumble of, like, it's too much to give, too much to help. We've got something in our hearts to look into right there. I think that is being called upon right there.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, I think that's also something to not look down upon. Just, that's another aspect where that whole thing of love covers multitude of sins, of, like, okay, this is an issue, but show grace to the situation, because we all have areas that we're not great in.
Yeah.
And so this needs to be addressed, but let's not just act like, you really should, almost, like, pointing a finger, like, you're screwing up with this. It's like, I get it's difficult, but there's a better way.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And the last two verses. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another, as good stewards of God's varied grace. Whoever speaks as one who speaks oracles of God, whoever serves as one who serves, by the strength that God supplies, in order that God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. To him belong glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. So I think this goes into aspect of, like, gifts and blessings. As one's, like, has received a gift, like, that's probably like a spiritual gift, which is to serve one another. And for is to be stewards of God's varied grace. I'm kind of interested in what the term varied grace is. Like, what is varied grace? But
I guess I would assume that part of what that's talking about is the grace that God's given me are the gifts.
mm-hmm.
And so the very graces are, I guess, the way I look at it is as good stewards of God's very grace. And then he lists off a couple of things, like whoever speaks, whoever speaks as one who speaks the oracle of God, whoever speaks, or whoever serves as one who serves by the strength that God supplies. And so these are examples of lists of the grace that God has given to each, and so each one has different gifts, so they're just varied in that way.
Yeah, I can see that. But I think for it is definitely the part. One is that you serve one another and you're good stewards of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have the oracle. If you have the oracles of God, you need to speak for it, and be a good steward of your words. Those who serve to be served well, good stewards of it. And that's what ways I think of it with speaking and serving. One is, if you're speaking, that you don't seek glory for yourself, that you seek glory for God, that your words are not enriching yourself, and those ways that you're serving is not enriching yourself.
Right. And one of the ways I've heard is like whoever speaks is when he speaks oracles of God. It's like generally when you're speaking, or maybe I'm more thinking of preaching, but like when you're speaking, that when you're talking of God, you're talking about God in such a way that gets people excited about God and and gets them gets them excited and in awe of God. Like they hadn't thought of God in this way before, and it makes them seem even like almost like brighter to them, and it should get them more encouraged to follow Him because of how amazing you're making out to be, and also it should encourage them to want to dig more into the Scripture, so that way they can themselves find out more stuff. It's like, okay, I didn't think of looking at God this way, and so it gets them just more excited. Okay, what are these other aspects of how does this look in these other situations?
Mm-hmm.
As a way of glorifying Him in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, honestly, when it says whoever serves, and in the sense of glorifying God, that to me seems kind of obvious. It's like, usually whenever you're serving for God, to others, usually it's like people are very appreciative to God.
Yeah.
That He used someone to help out.
For my thought right there, came back to, once again, the ministering to honor and shame. It's a book that I'm slowly getting through, so I'm going to be mentioning it probably a whole lot. But part of it was viewed as patronage, which is something which in our Western culture is something that we don't fully understand quite. We just normally think of it as this is a deal between, like, my patronage is if you sell like a car and I bought a car from you, you would view that as patronage, but they would probably view it more of like a relationship thing where you are the person that helps provide cars, and you want to, if you're the person who provides cars, you're expected to help provide cars, but I'm also expected to help you get the word out of what you do, and that you're honorable of providing cars. But for it here, probably people would think of it as somebody who serves would be like, oh, he's serving the community. So some people might be like, that's a very honorable position because they are, people can go to them to get their needs because he's seeking to serve the community and would be in an honored position. But God is saying this honored position that you get put up as should not be for to honor yourself, but to do God's will. That even though you're in this high position to serve others, and so don't use it for yourself, which in some cases people, and probably in society, would probably actually elevate you in that position. Well, probably in our society, we would probably value the person who speaks. It'd be like, oh, they're the leader. Well, other cultures might view the person who's able to provide like that as a leader. So I think it's like a good aspect right there, is that it's kind of there that it's talking about both, but and each one can provide a benefit to yourself, because if God gives you the ability to speak and you're good with words, you can definitely turn those words to benefit yourself. Mm-hmm. And as you said, like rile people up to seek God, but you can also rile people up to serve yourself, as in the same way as a person who serves and helps others can be using it to build loyalty towards themselves and not actually serving God.
Right. Because you gotta also be careful with, because there's the way you just to glorify yourself in the sense of you think you have a better way of looking at God, or a better way of perceiving Him, and then getting everyone else to look at Him like that, and then also you're looked upon as the person to get direction from, and you are belittling those who have thought in a certain way, there's a popular way of looking at it, and you think differently about it. All of a sudden, you may belittle those ways of thinking about it. Everyone looks to you because you now have this new, and perhaps because it's different, like you found the secret.
Yeah.
And so you have, even though you think that it's a way that you have brought clarity to who God is, you've actually just glorified yourself in the situation, because everyone else follows your lead with stuff.
Yeah.
And then you're still probably wrong.
Yeah.
If you're saying something different, you got a problem.
Yeah. I think for that should be the end of it. All right. So thank you all for listening or watching this episode of Sacred Assumptions. Turns out this is probably just going to be all one episode, because the topic that we probably got into popped up right in the middle of it. But if you enjoyed what you hear, please like, comment, and subscribe, so you know the next time we're on. And it really helps out the channel if you like and subscribe. Thanks.